March 6, 1944. Berlin, Germany. Luftwaffe headquarters on Wilhelmstrasse. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, Supreme Commander of the German Air Force, held combat reports from pilots returning from intercepting American bombers. His eyes scanned the pages with growing incredulity. The reports described massive formations of B-17 bombers attacking Berlin for the first time, escorted by unknown fighters all the way to the heart of the Reich. Göring had personally guaranteed Hitler that American bombers would never reach Berlin. The mathematics seemed inviolable, built upon immutable physics and geography. Berlin was 1,000 kilometers from English bases, 2,000 kilometers round trip. No Allied fighter had sufficient range. British Spitfires had a maximum range of 750 kilometers. American P-47 Thunderbolts reached 800 kilometers. Bombers without escorts were slow targets for the experienced Luftwaffe. Between October 1943 and February 1944, American bombers suffered catastrophic losses of 20 to 25% on deep missions into Germany, absolutely unsustainable rates. The 8th Air Force was being methodically decimated. Göring crumpled the reports and uttered what he considered immutable truth. Let the Americans come with their slow giants. Their fighters don't have the range to protect them here. Every deep mission into Germany costs them 20 to 25% of aircraft. The mathematics is on our side. They will bleed to death before defeating us. What Göring didn't know, what none of the German strategists gathered in that room could comprehend, was that those unknown fighters over Berlin on March 6th were P-51 Mustangs, an aircraft that shouldn't exist according to all conventional aeronautical logic. Created through an improbable international collaboration and produced with speed that defied German comprehension, the Mustang solved the problem considered impossible in aerial warfare. Combining American design, British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine manufactured under license by Packard, and mass automotive production techniques, the Mustang cost only $50,000, less than a luxury car of the era, but had a range of 2,655 kilometers with external tanks, double that of any Axis fighter. Between March and June 1944, in just 4 months, Mustangs would destroy the Luftwaffe through relentless mathematical attrition. When Göring finally comprehended what he was facing, he would declare with final devastation, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." The mathematics of the Luftwaffe's defeat was already being written not in the skies over Berlin, but in production spreadsheets and technical specifications that revealed a disparity so vast, it transformed aerial conflict into statistical inevitability. The P-51D Mustang had a range of 2,655 kilometers with external drop tanks, allowing it to escort bombers to any target in Germany and return to bases in England. The Messerschmitt Bf 109G, Germany's primary fighter, had a range of 998 kilometers. The Focke-Wulf FW-190 reached 900 kilometers. Even the advanced Me-262 jet had only 1,050 kilometers of operational range. This disparity wasn't marginal but categorical, meaning Mustangs could escort bombers for entire missions while German fighters were limited to point defense near their bases. The geography Göring considered an immutable ally had become an enemy through American engineering. Cost revealed another dimension of industrial disparity. Each P-51D cost $50,000 to $51,000 to produce, equivalent to approximately $700,000 today. A Messerschmitt Me-262 jet, technically superior in pure speed at 870 kilometers per hour, versus the Mustang 703, cost more than $100,000, more than double. But speed didn't matter when Me-262s lacked range to escort, fuel to fly sustained operations, or adequately trained pilots to operate them in sufficient numbers. The Mustang offered operational effectiveness per dollar that no German fighter could match. It was an industrialized solution to an operational problem, not an exercise in technical perfection. Production volume crushed any German technical advantage under the weight of numerical abundance. The United States produced 15,586 total P-51 Mustangs of all variants between 1941 and 1945. The P-51D variant alone represented approximately 8,000 units. Germany produced 430 Mi-262s during the entire war. About 20,000 Bf-109Gs spread across all years of conflict and all fronts simultaneously, and approximately 3,000 FW-190Ds of the high-altitude variant. But fragmented German production distributed between Eastern Front, Reich Defense, Mediterranean and other theaters meant they could never concentrate sufficient force at a specific location. Mustangs, concentrated primarily in the 8th Air Force operating from England, created overwhelming local numerical superiority at exactly the decisive point of the air war. The strategic impact was measurable with devastating precision. Between March and June 1944, a period of just 4 months, P-51 Mustangs destroyed approximately 4,950 German aircraft, effectively breaking the Luftwaffe's backbone. More critical than aircraft losses were losses of experienced pilots that Germans couldn't replace. Germany trained pilots in 6 months with limited fuel and reduced flight hours. America replaced pilots and aircraft faster than Germans could shoot them down. American bomber loss rates dropped dramatically from 20 to 25% without Mustang escort to 3 to 5% with Mustang escort, transforming strategic bombing from operational disaster into decisive weapon that would shorten the war. The P-51 Mustang's origin was a story of pragmatic improvisation, triumphing over conventional planning. In April 1940, when war already devastated Europe but the United States remained officially neutral, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation with a direct proposal: build Curtiss P-40 Warhawk fighters under license for the desperate Royal Air Force. James H. Dutch Kindleberger, president of NAAA, made a counter-proposal that seemed audacity bordering on arrogance. We'll give you a better, more modern fighter in less time than it would take to establish production under license of an existing design. The British Purchasing Commission, skeptical but desperate, accepted. What happened next defied all norms of aeronautical development. The NA-73X prototype was completed in 102 days from contract signing, an absurdly short period to create a completely new fighter. It flew for the first time on October 26, 1940. Initially equipped with an Allison V1710 engine, the Mustang was a fast and maneuverable aircraft at low altitudes, but had limited performance above 4,500 meters, exactly where aerial combat over Europe occurred. The British put the aircraft into service primarily for reconnaissance and ground attack, recognizing its limitations. But British engineers, always looking to improve equipment, had an idea that would change aerial warfare. In 1942, they tested the Mustang with a Rolls-Royce Merlin 61 engine, the same engine that equipped the most advanced Spitfires. Performance exploded. The combination of American aerodynamic fuselage with British supercharged engine created a fighter that exceeded both in practically all specifications. America, always pragmatic, licensed Merlin engine production to Packard Motor Company, an automotive manufacturer from Detroit. Packard produced the engines as V1650 Buick-7s, applying mass automotive production techniques to aeronautical engine manufacturing. The result was extraordinary. American design plus British engine plus American automotive production equals a fighter that could do the impossible. By the end of production, through continuous assembly line refinements, each Mustang was built in only 4 hours per pound of weight, an efficiency that Germans, operating with artisanal methods at industrial scale, simply couldn't comprehend or replicate. Big Week, the period from February 20th to 25, 1944, demonstrated on an operational scale what the Mustang represented strategically. The 8th Air Force launched the first massive coordinated air offensive against German aircraft factories, targets that produced exactly the fighters defending the Reich's skies. 1,000 bombers per day took off from bases in England, escorted by hundreds of P-51 Mustangs along with P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings at shorter ranges. The concept was brutal in its simplicity. Force the Luftwaffe to rise and fight defending its own factories, then destroy it in a battle of attrition that America could sustain, and Germany couldn't. The result was devastating in multiple dimensions. During Big Week, the Luftwaffe lost approximately 355 aircraft and critically, more than 100 experienced pilots killed in combat, representing 14% of the fighter pilot force. For Germany, already fighting on 3 fronts simultaneously, these were irreplaceable losses. But statistics told only part of the story. The true victory was psychological and operational. For the first time, American fighters not only escorted bombers to targets deep in Germany, but actively hunted German fighters, pursuing them to their own bases and destroying them during takeoff and landing when they were most vulnerable. German pilots realized with growing horror that there was no safe zone anymore, no sanctuary. Mustangs could reach them anywhere within the Reich. The 8th Air Force flew nearly 4,000 heavy bomber sorties during Big Week, dropping more than 20 million pounds of bombs on industrial and military targets. It lost more than 200 heavy bombers with approximately 2,600 casualties among killed, wounded, and captured. In absolute terms, the numbers were high, but context revealed fundamental transformation. Previous missions to Schweinfurt in October 1943, before Mustangs were available in numbers, had cost nearly 30% of attacking aircraft per mission, a catastrophic rate that forced temporary suspension of deep strategic bombing. During Big Week, with Mustang escort, losses were only 5% of attacking force, a painful but sustainable rate that allowed continued operations. More crucial, American losses were completely replaceable, while German losses weren't. America had industrial capacity to build hundreds of bombers and fighters monthly. More importantly, had a training system that produced thousands of qualified crews continuously. Germany, strangled by fuel scarcity, was drastically reducing pilot training time. New Luftwaffe pilots in 1944 frequently had less than half the flight hours of new American pilots and faced American veterans with hundreds of combat hours. It was systematic slaughter disguised as aerial combat. Adolf Galland, general of fighters of the Luftwaffe and himself an ace with 104 victories, observed his forces' disintegration with growing despair. In reports to Goring and Hitler, Galland was brutally honest about operational reality. Americans now escort bombers with full-range fighters to any point in Germany. Our pilots face numerical superiority of 3-1 or 4-1 in practically every combat. We're losing experienced pilots faster than we can train adequate replacements. It's not a question of individual competence or courage of our men. It's a question of abundance that we simply cannot match with available resources. His words were ignored by Nazi leadership that preferred illusions to reality, but German pilots on the front lines understood perfectly. Captured Luftwaffe documents after the war revealed the extent of German recognition of operational inferiority. An April 1944 report admitted with remarkable candor, "The American Mustang combines range, speed, maneuverability, and reliability to a degree that none of our current fighters can match. More critically, they exist in numbers that make effective defense mathematically impossible. For every Mustang we shoot down, 3 appear the next day. For every American pilot we kill, 5 arrive as replacements. We're fighting a battle of attrition against an enemy, for whom attrition is a viable strategy, because replacement capacity makes all losses temporary." The contrast with the Me-262 perfectly illustrated the difference between specific technical superiority and systemic operational effectiveness. The Messerschmitt Me-262 Schwalbe was the world's first operational jet fighter, a technological marvel that flew at 870 kilometers per hour, 167 kilometers per hour, faster than the P-51D. In direct combat under ideal conditions, the Me-262 was superior. But war isn't fought in ideal conditions or isolated individual combats. The Me-262 required special concrete runways to accommodate sensitive jet engines. It consumed fuel at rates that Germany, with synthetic production being systematically bombed, couldn't sustain. It was extremely vulnerable during takeoff and landing when operating at low speeds. And it existed in ridiculously inadequate numbers. Germany produced only 1,430 Me-262s during the entire war against 15,586 American Mustangs, a ratio of more than 10-1. But the real disparity was even greater. Of the 1,430 Me-262s produced, only a fraction was operational at any moment due to lack of fuel, spare parts, pilots trained in jet operations, and adequate bases. Many Me-262s were destroyed on the ground by bombing or Mustang attacks hunting them at their bases. Of those that managed to take off, they had only 50% chance of returning due to mechanical problems, lack of fuel, or Mustangs waiting for them when they tried to land. German technical superiority was literally buried under an avalanche of merely adequate Mustangs in unbeatable operational abundance. American pilots developed specific tactics to neutralize Me-262s. Since jets were too fast to pursue in level flight, Mustangs patrolled known Me-262 bases and attacked during takeoff or landing approach when speed was reduced and maneuverability limited. It was a brutal but devastatingly effective tactic. German Me-262 pilots described the experience as a nightmare. Even in a technically superior aircraft, they were always fleeing, always vulnerable, always at overwhelming numerical disadvantage. Many never completed more than 5 missions before being shot down or killed in accidents. March 6, 1944 marked a psychological turning point. On that day, P-51B and P-51C Mustangs from the 8th Air Force escorted B-17 bombers on the first mission over Berlin, capital of the Reich that Göring had sworn would never be reached by Allied fighters. The distance from bases in England to Berlin and back was exactly the type of mission that had destroyed unescorted bombers months before. But with Mustangs, the mission was executed with acceptable losses. More important than physical damage was psychological impact. Germans, especially Luftwaffe leadership, understood that geography was no longer defense, that distance was no longer security, that no target in the Reich was beyond Allied reach. Hermann Göring, receiving reports, reportedly declared with growing despair, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." The quote, preserved in multiple post-war sources, captured fundamental recognition. Göring had built his career and reputation on aerial warfare. He understood operational and strategic implications of long-range fighters better than any other Nazi leader. If Mustangs could escort bombers to Berlin, they could escort anywhere. The defense in depth the Luftwaffe depended on was broken. German industrial production was now vulnerable to sustained precision bombing. It was only a matter of time. Mustang production demonstrated American industrial capacity on a scale Germans couldn't mentally process. North American Aviation operated assembly lines in Inglewood, California, and Dallas, Texas. At peak production in 1944, factories produced approximately 500 P-51s per month, a rate of more than 15 aircraft per day. Each Mustang moved through the assembly line in a process that combined aeronautical precision with automotive efficiency. Components were standardized, interchangeable, produced by hundreds of subcontractors across America, and assembled with speed that eliminated traditional aeronautical manufacturing bottlenecks. Germany, in contrast, produced aircraft through methods that remained essentially artisanal despite industrial scale. Each Bf-109 or FW-190 required hundreds of hours of skilled manual labor, individual adjustments, and attention to details that produced excellent aircraft, but in fatally inadequate numbers. Albert Speer's efforts to rationalize production through standardization increased numbers but never achieved American efficiency. Allied bombing constantly interrupted supply chains, destroyed factories, killed skilled workers. Germany was trying to produce sufficient aircraft while the industrial infrastructure that made production possible was being systematically destroyed. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. Adolf Galland, general of fighters of the Luftwaffe, surrendered to Allied forces after years commanding the Reich's air defense. In the interrogations that followed, Allied intelligence officers asked the question that had haunted German strategists for more than a year. "When did you know you had lost the air war?" Galland, a man known for brutal honesty and an ace with 104 confirmed victories, responded without hesitation, his voice carrying the weight of understanding that had come too late to change the outcome. March 1944, when Mustangs began appearing over Berlin regularly. At that moment, everything we had built, our entire strategy of defense in depth, all our confidence in geography as an ally, crumbled. Galland continued, his words preserved in interrogation reports that would become fundamental historical documents. We had technically superior fighters in many respects. Our FW-190D was robust and powerful. Our Me-262 jet was faster than anything the Allies possessed. Our pilots, those who survived long enough to gain experience, were courageous and skilled. But we didn't have numbers. We didn't have fuel. We didn't have time or resources to train pilots adequately. And above all, we didn't have capacity to replace losses at the rate we suffered them. He paused, looking out the window as if visualizing battles he had fought and lost. Every day Americans appeared with hundreds of Mustangs. We shot down some, sometimes many. The next day there were more. We weren't fighting against individual pilots or aircraft. We were fighting against entire factories that produced Mustangs faster than we could destroy them, against a training system that replaced lost pilots before their seats got cold. Gallen's realization penetrated more deeply than tactics or strategy, reaching philosophical understanding about the nature of modern industrial warfare. The Mustang wasn't the best fighter in the world in any pure individual metric. Our Me-262 was faster by a significant margin. Our FW-190D had greater firepower, but the Mustang was always there, always. It had range to follow us to our bases, to our homes, to anywhere within the Reich. It had numbers to surround us, to guarantee that even when we won individual combat, we lost the battle of attrition. And when we lost an experienced pilot, a loss that was completely irreparable for us, Americans simply sent 3 new pilots the next day, each with more training hours than our pilots were receiving in 1944. Gallen shook his head with something that seemed like reluctant admiration, mixed with bitterness of defeat. The air war wasn't won by the best aircraft or bravest pilots. It was won by the best industrial system that transformed merely good design into absolutely unbeatable operational abundance. Interrogators pressed Gallen about the Me-262, asking if earlier availability or in greater numbers would have changed the outcome. Gallen was categorical in his response, destroying myths already beginning to form about miracle weapons that would have saved Germany. The Me-262 was a magnificent aircraft, superior in pure performance. But it required infrastructure we didn't possess and couldn't have built under constant bombing. It needed special concrete runways. It consumed fuel we didn't have. Its jet engines failed frequently and required intensive maintenance by specialized technicians who were scarce. And even if we had solved all these problems, we would still be producing hundreds, where Americans produced tens of thousands. He looked directly at the interrogators. You produced 15,586 Mustangs. We produced 1,430 Me-262s. There's no tactical or strategic scenario where 1,130 aircraft, no matter how superior, defeat 15,586. The mathematics was implacable. The final statistics were overwhelming in their totality and unequivocal in their verdict on the European air war. The United States produced 15,586 P-51 Mustangs of all variants between 1941 and 1945, a number representing not just volume, but sustainability of mass production. Each unit cost between $50,000 and $51,000, equivalent to approximately $700,000 today, less than many luxury automobiles of the era. The operational range of 2,655 kilometers with external tanks versus 998 kilometers of the Bf-109G represented more than double the capacity, a difference not incremental but categorical that redefined the possible in aerial warfare. Mustangs destroyed approximately 4,150 German aircraft in aerial combat, representing nearly half of the 10,720 aerial victories claimed by the USAAF in Europe. American bomber loss rates dropped from catastrophic 20 to 25% to sustainable 3 to 5% with Mustang escort, a transformation that turned strategic bombing from failed concept into decisive weapon. General Karl Tui Spatz, commander of United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe, declared in post-war assessment, the P-51 Mustang was the most important aircraft of the European air war. Not because it was faster or more heavily armed than all adversaries, but because it solved the problem we had considered impossible, how to escort heavy bombers anywhere in Germany and bring them back. When Mustangs appeared over Berlin, Demonstrating that distance was no longer defense, the Luftwaffe was effectively finished as a force capable of contesting German skies. This assessment wasn't hyperbole, but recognition of operational reality that numbers confirmed without ambiguity. The most devastating quote came from Hermann Göring himself, preserved in multiple sources and repeated in his Nuremberg testimony. "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." These words from the Luftwaffe commander, the man who had built the German Air Force and promised to defend the Reich from bombing, carried the weight of professional recognition of fundamental defeat. Göring understood the strategic implications of long-range fighters better than any other Nazi leader. Mustangs over Berlin meant no target in the Reich was safe, that German industrial production was now vulnerable to systematic destruction, that the air war of attrition would be won by the side with greater replacement capacity. And that side was unequivocally America. Adolf Galland, writing in his post-war memoirs published as The First and the Last, offered more technical but equally devastating analysis. The Me-262 was an aircraft superior in pure performance, a true marvel of German engineering, but there were only 430 of them against 15,586 Mustangs. We didn't lose the air war from lack of technology or absence of courage from our pilots. We lost from lack of industrial capacity to transform superior technology into sufficient operational abundance to make strategic difference. The Mustang proved that in modern warfare, operational range plus reliability plus numerical abundance crushes specific technical superiority every time. This admission from one of Germany's greatest aces represented an epitaph for the Luftwaffe and lesson for future wars. The P-51 Mustang's legacy transcended numbers and aerial victories, establishing fundamental principles of aerial warfare that remain valid. It permanently proved that solving operational problems through pragmatic engineering and mass production surpasses pursuit of technical perfection in scarcity. The improbable combination of American design, British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine manufactured under license by automotive manufacturer Packard, and mass production techniques from Detroit created a fighter that cost less than many automobiles, but destroyed the Luftwaffe in months. This synthesis of international capabilities and industrialization represented exactly the type of collaboration and pragmatism that totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany couldn't replicate due to ideology and organizational rigidity. The Mustang made strategic bombing possible, not through heavy armor or massive defensive armament, but through escorts that could accompany bombers for complete missions. This capability shortened the war by months, possibly years, saving hundreds of thousands of Allied lives and civilians who would have died in prolonged combat. Destruction of German aircraft industry and synthetic fuel refineries by bombers escorted by Mustangs left the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe without fuel and air cover during the Normandy invasion and subsequent campaigns. Allied air superiority in 1944-1945 was so complete that Allied ground operations rarely faced significant German air attack, a luxury Germans never had on Eastern or Western fronts. And it cost $51,000, less than a luxury Cadillac of the era. This juxtaposition of affordable cost and transformative strategic impact encapsulates the deepest lesson. Modern industrial warfare isn't won by the best weapon in laboratory or test field. It's won by adequate weapon produced in quantity that makes enemy resistance mathematically unsustainable. Germany produced technically impressive aircraft. The Me-262 remains a milestone in aviation history, but technology without capacity to produce it at relevant scale is historical curiosity, not decisive weapon. America produced the Mustang good enough in quantity impossible to overcome, and that combination won the skies of Europe. The P-51 Mustang didn't just win air battles. It made Allied victory possible by enabling systematic destruction of German industrial capacity through strategic bombing that finally worked as planned. It forced the Luftwaffe into battle of attrition it couldn't win. It demonstrated that international collaboration and industrial pragmatism surpassed technological nationalism and pursuit of perfection. And it did all this while costing less than a luxury automobile, proving that strategic effectiveness doesn't require technological extravagance, but intelligent engineering applied with industrial abundance. The lesson resonates through decades. In war, victory goes not to those with best equipment, but to those with adequate equipment in quantity that makes enemy defeat mathematical inevitability, not tactical possibility.